Delicious.
If you're a player who looks up to high-level PUBG streamers and pros to try to win more games, then you're doing it wrong. Constantly trying to punch above your weight class isn't going to make you a better player, but instead, develop a lot of bad habits that ultimately result in losing way more games than you win. If you think running around like Shroud and killing half the server is the only way to play the game, then this is why you suck at PUBG. There are no shortage of things you can learn from watching pros and high-level streamers when it comes to PUBG. It's because of them that I've been able to adapt a lot of the strategies and methods that they use to try and help other players with the videos that I make. But there's one thing in particular that I think needs to be understood when we talk about high-level play and how potentially damaging it can be to the average player's experience with the game, and that's expectations. When we watch highly skilled streamers play PUBG, there's no question that the most entertaining aspect of their gameplay is how good they are and how many kills they can get each game. It's certainly more fun to watch than someone who spends a whole match sneaking around trying to avoid fights. With that said, in regards to expectations, I believe it seduces us into thinking that every game we play has to be a 20 kill frag fest when in reality, that's just an unrealistic goal for the majority of players. That isn't to say that achieving a 20 kill game is impossible, but rather the idea that we should be aiming for this with every new round shouldn't be what's expected. Admittedly, I don't win as many games as I'd like to. While this undoubtedly stems from the fact that I myself suck at PUBG to some extent, my lack of wins are ultimately symptomatic of these type of expectations. For all my advice about making smart decisions and being efficient in your gameplay, I constantly struggle with the mentality of taking or getting into fights for kills instead of trying to survive to the endgame. I want to be clear that this isn't a criticism of more aggressive playstyles, but rather highlight how I myself have seen a lot of diminishing returns trying to play like this, and perhaps point out things that might parallel your experiences as well. When we talk about high-level streamers and pros, it's important to keep things like context in mind when attempting to emulate some of the things that they do. What I mean by this is realizing that, at times, their experience and our experience while playing PUBG can be very different. Now keep in mind when I say this that I'm in no way diminishing or discounting the skills of players like Shroud or Choco, but rather being realistic about the impact of things like stream snipers in regards to skewed expectations due in part to potentially inflated kill counts. I realize that by saying this I'm setting myself up for a lot of negative feedback, but understand that I look up to these guys too. I believe unequivocally that they are two of the best players this game has ever and may ever see. What I simply want to point out is that because of the level at which these guys play, mixed with the occasional free kill as it were, that this isn't representative of the typical PUBG experience for most players. I believe that by understanding this, we can begin to better recognize that what works for them in terms of playstyle shouldn't necessarily be how players, myself included, approach situations throughout the game. And I can already see the comments going, hey dumbass, Choco and Shroud win games and you don't. Who are you to say how they play the game is wrong? Well, to be clear, how they play the game isn't wrong by any means, but rather isn't going to work for everyone. That's because I realize there's a disproportionate amount of skill between them, I, and the majority of the people who play this game. Like myself, most players simply haven't put in the same amount of time or developed the same level of skills that they have in order to do what they do. For example, as someone who likes to play golf, I have to frequently remind myself of my skills and abilities in regards to the shots that I take. Just because I've watched guys like Tiger Woods or Ricky Fowler prove time and time again what things are possible at a high level of play, doesn't mean that I'm equipped to be able to do the same on any sort of consistent basis. Instead, it behooves me to play within my ability in order to have a much more desirable outcome. PUBG is no different in this regard. Making plays or taking shots that you may not be prepared enough to win shouldn't be encouraged just because you've seen it work. There's a reason high-level play contributes to a very small percentage of the player base because only a few have been able to achieve it. That isn't to say you shouldn't strive to reach higher levels and become a better player, but in terms of winning games on a more consistent basis, there's nothing wrong with being honest with yourself about what you can and can't do. I believe too much emphasis is put on wanting to play more aggressively, either because that's how the pros play or because how negatively we react or treat people for camping. I'm not saying I enjoy getting shot in the back by a guy sitting in a corner waiting for me to run by, but I certainly don't fault him when I was the one being too aggressive or not paying better attention. PUBG doesn't care how many kills you get. It cares whether or not you survive till the end of the game. Like I said, I'm just as guilty as the next guy when it comes to this, but I've been able to identify it as a pretty significant problem with my ability to win games. Trust me, I too want to win most of my games with 15 to 20 kills, but in reality, I've won games with 10 kills and I've won games with 1 kill. Sure, it isn't as satisfying, but that shouldn't discount the win at the end of the day. From the wise words of Dominic Toretto, it doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile, winning is winning.